It can be sad to think about all the animals in the world who are in need of a loving home. Luckily, there are plenty of shelters that are dedicated to helping these pets get adopted. For this story, I decided to focus on cats who have found their happily ever after.
Hi.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about my latest videos. Hardy had been abused and tortured for weeks before someone who claimed to have found the cat wandering around brought him to animal control. Alley Cat Rescue Incorporated saved Hardy and helped rehabilitate him. He now lives in a loving home with a couple who both work in the veterinary field. Lefty struggles with a goopy eye and an autoimmune disorder known as pillow paw that causes a cat's paw pads to become swollen and cracked. Luckily, he was adopted by two volunteers at Perfect Pals Cat Sanctuary and Adoption Centers in January of 2016, who are plenty cat savvy and will make for the perfect caretakers for little Lefty. When Lady was first adopted in November of last year, she was both underweight and terrified. She spent 2 weeks hiding from her new owners under the bathroom sink. Now, her adopters describe her as cuddly and confident. For a while, Perfect Pals was convinced that Rhododendron would be a lifer at the shelter. She was found abandoned, deck-eyed, and defenseless in 2013. Although Rhodey was adopted twice in the year after she was found, she was returned both times because she didn't consistently use her litter box. Fast forward to March of 2017, when Rhodey finally met her match, an owner who was willing to pamper her and overlook her inconsistent bathroom habits. Evie's owners found her on a trip to Austin. They had stopped by an animal shelter and ran into a man with a crate full of disheveled kittens, who said that no shelter would take them. Evie's owner picked her out of the batch and brought her all the way back home with them to New Jersey. They said she was probably around 4 weeks old at the time, and she was dirty, full of fleas, and skittish. Now she's a well-groomed fluff monster, and a diva. She's loving and affectionate, but on her terms. Butter was 16 years old when she was found in December of last year with crusty eyes, hair loss, inflamed and scabbed over skin, ear mites, and dental disease. The poor cat was also vomiting and had blood in her urine. Despite all of her issues, though, Butter was affectionate and loving with volunteers, and before long she was adopted into a caring home. She truly beat the odds. Ratsy's owners came up with his name when he was just a kitten and looked a little like a rat. Originally, they were just fostering him. But the cat eventually won them over, and they decided to keep him. Now, his adopters say he's big and goofy, and that his meow sounds like a cow's moo. Polly was adopted as a kitten and has grown into a stunning cat. His owner describes him as outgoing and affectionate. Polly's adopter continues to foster cats and says that Polly loves to dote on them. Arugula was adopted by her foster family in 2014. But she had been through some rough times before finding a happy home. When Arugula was first brought to Perfect Pals, she was 1 year old and pregnant. After having and raising her kittens, she was moved to an adoption store, only to be moved back to the shelter. She stopped eating and had to spend 2 months in a clinic on a feeding tube. After getting back to a healthy weight, Arugula was placed into foster care with the family who eventually ended up adopting her. Bongo was abandoned at an apartment complex and living in the hallways before someone called Alley Cat Rescue. When the rescue center found him, he had hip injuries that required surgery, but he's doing much better now. Ming was brought to Perfect Pals by a family who was moving overseas. Prior to that, the 5-year-old cat had had multiple homes, and it was suspected that she had been abused. Shelter life was hard for Ming since she doesn't get along well with other cats. Fortunately, though, she was adopted a few years ago by a couple who was looking for a cat in need of some extra TLC. Betty had a long journey to adoption. After being in foster care, she spent a year under an owner's sink, before being brought back to an adoption store. She was adopted and returned 2 times before finding the right home in August of 2015, where she continues to thrive today. Rascal may be quite the handful, hence his name, but he found a forever home with a couple who puts up with all of his crazy playfulness. Rascal was brought to Perfect Pals as an unneutered stray who had parasites. After some initial fostering, he got healthy again and was adopted in April of 2015. Mistletoe was brought to Alley Cat Rescue as a little kitten. He had been living outside and was in desperate need of some TLC. The beautiful bobtail cat has since been adopted into a loving home. Just a year old and undeniably adorable, Martha Washington was a stray when she was brought to a local shelter. The timid kitty didn't have to stay long before she was adopted. Martha's new owners came across her on Pet Finder. Since they adopted her a couple months ago, they say she's gained a bit of weight and enjoys running down the halls, napping on people's feet, and being cuddly and chatty. 13-year-old Charlie had just about given up hope after being at the Perfect Pals shelter for 6 months. His adopters came across his story and decided to take him home, even though they weren't planning on adding another cat to their family. They already had one. Charlie's new owners said he adjusted to his new life quickly and happily. Skitters was first adopted from Perfect Pals when he was just a kitten. He was returned in March of this year at 12 years old because his family could no longer care for him. Having recently lost his sister, Skitters was in need of an adopter who could provide another feline companion for him. He found that in Melanie, a pet shop volunteer with another senior cat at home already. A man discovered Oliver living outside by himself when he was just a kitten, and brought him to Alley Cat Rescue. The man didn't want a cat, but volunteered to foster Oliver while Alley Cat looked for a permanent home for him. In the end, he ended up falling in love with Oliver and keeping him.